psychological discussions.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Radio Islam International. You are listening to the program You Are Loved, and we are doing the 24th episode today. Uh, with me in studio, we have Mawlana Zahier Ahmad Raggie. Mawlana, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We take this opportunity of also greeting all our listeners on Radio Islam and on the Ummahat platform. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well, we were discussing about narcissism. In our last discussion, we had about, we were speaking about, sexual validation amongst codependent Muslims. And we did that this codependency and its consequences all fall under the disease of the heart because they involve neglecting the needs and the rights of the soul. And normally we see that this topic, very little is discussed about it. So we did about the the commitment validation from the men they want to be with. Codependence, love must be earned, and we find it more frequently in today's time. We find it the casual affairs. We also asked the question that how can people do such a sin? And we gave a few answers. Number one, we said that some women were sexually abused as a child because we said that the sin, it has a backlog to it and there's a background to it. If you look at this person, and this triggers different scenarios that come about. We feel that some people have that they become very active sexually. Some people are not active at all, and some feel that they are dirty and worthless. And we need these people to get the right help and assistance. If not, then it becomes very detrimental. We also have a few confessions where long periods of time have passed where people do not bath, and bathing often the total opposite happens to some people, and some people are too ashamed if this happened to them, in their childhood, to inform their parents out of fear of being either blamed, punished, judged, and looked down upon. And we also just mentioned that men also get abused, but many remain silent, and many Muslim boys were sometimes abused and molested at home, hotels, schools, masjids, madrasas, classes, etc. And these people have deep trust issues, and no one is brought up as a homosexual, and we discussed this quite extensively. Also, the second reason we have is because people are involved in illicit relations because of friends who are in this relationships, and it seems that it has a positive outcome. And the third reason we mentioned was insecurity. And the main thing that we said is that narcissist men will take advantage of such females and thereafter discard them. I think this is where we stopped. But we also asked the question that why would they want to be with them? That is, why would codependents want to be with people like this?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Yes, Maulana, Jazakallah for that brief feedback, or rather report back of what we had discussed in our previous discussion. I would like to just make a disclaimer once again, that these are things that we are talking of, which are sensitive. To some, it might be a little bit more sensitive, and if you feel uncomfortable, please do not continue listening. However, we need to understand that these are issues that our community is facing, and there is definitely a need to discuss these issues. Also, we need to understand that Islam is a very open, balanced deen, and it even addresses very sensitive issues in a very balanced way, always keeping in mind the concept of taqwa, the concept of being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And among the reasons that we are tackling this topic and this ill that we are observing much more in our community today is that our young boys, girls should be aware of this. As parents, we should be more observant of the reactions of our children when they come back, so they don't grow up to be among the victims of these. And that's very important for us to keep in mind. Also, another reason that we are discussing this is that once we are aware, there are, alhamdulillah, thumma alhamdulillah, many very qualified professional Muslim coaches, counselors who, as parents, we must go to, and also take our children if we feel that they are suffering from some form of this type of negative behavior that is developing in them. And that's among the reasons why we are discussing this topic. And as you have rightly said, Marana, right in the beginning, that this is a topic that is not generally discussed. But in the broader discussion of the topic, it is necessary for us to talk about it. We've said it before, and I say it repeatedly, that when there's an elephant in the room, at least introduce the elephant. So the question that we are going to continue discussing today is why they would want to be with narcissists. So we spoke of codependence, and sometimes they go through various forms of abuse, but why do they want to remain? Well, if a codependent woman sometimes wants a wealthy man or a man who makes her feel needed, she may accept all these issues to be with him. All the negative things that she sees in him, she observes in him, and she would remain there because he provides her the lifestyle, the social approval, and the validation that she needs and wants to feel good about herself. And this is one of the reasons why they would want to continue living with people that are abusive to them. Usually, these women, because they possess a very low self love, they don't mind being with men who are emotionally unavailable, as they don't know what healthy love is or what it feels like. So these are women that grew up with this abuse, and now they're finding some form of validation. They don't know anything better, and they would then continue living with them because they are enjoying some other aspects of good lifestyle, etc. So if a Muslim man who is not a narcissist, and inshallah most of us are not, and most of our Muslim men are not. So if a Muslim man who is not a narcissist, but sometimes openly displays a few traits of narcissism that make him look like, and I will use the word like a playboy, takes up the offer of lovemaking from a Muslim woman. And we spoke about how sometimes some of our women, very few, however, dress up even whilst they are in the abaya. You find that there are ways that they dress that draws attention to some men. So if they take up the offer of getting involved with a Muslim woman and doesn't follow through with a commitment to her, then that male will be presented to others as a narcissist, and the codependent here becomes a self-proclaimed victim. What we're saying here is that sometimes we find that certain women would try to attract some men, and this particular man who's displaying sometimes some traits, and if he does not take up the offer, then you'll find that these very women will start calling that man a narcissist. So it's very important that we understand this. So in this situation, despite her being the one to make the efforts to seduce and unfortunately even sometimes commit zina with him, and we spoke about the various categories of zina, with the eyes, with the ears, with the speech, with your hands, and etc. She and other women looking at the situation believe that he is the criminal who's taken advantage of her without giving her what she wanted in return. So unlike narcissistic women, codependents are less likely to engage in unlawful relationships, unlawful intimacy, and sex just for the fun of it. This will not happen that regularly, and it's hardly going to take place. They usually want a relationship just to talk, acceptance, and sometimes heavy validation in return. it is very common for codependents to be fooled by other men who display narcissistic behavior. These men are usually codependents as well and are up and down in their own levels of Iman and their own levels of mental health all the time. So these men sometimes they are become very pious and they sometimes go through very high levels of mental stability. And then sometimes they will also drop very low in their spirituality. And that is the time when shaitan also, takes advantage of the situation and they may fall prey to whatever is been drawn to them. The narcissistic traits that they release in public for temporary enjoyment and ego boosts are usually reeled back when they regret their actions and go through a phase of making tawbah, returning to deen. And you will find this very regularly, very often, that they will fall prey to these seductions, these attractions, and then they realize they made a mistake, and then they will be very punctual with their salah. They will make lots of dua, lot of istighfar. But then very soon you will find that they will fall into the trap again, unfortunately. So they don't and can't behave like narcissists every day, as it isn't in their nature to do so, nor do they have this disorder. So it's not that they are regularly, they are people who are victims of this disorder all the time. However, it's not easy for these men to make changes for the long term, which is why they will jump in and out of the deen phases regularly. And we observe this so often that men will come and they'll make tawbah, they'll make istighfar, they'll confess, and they said, we made a mistake, shaitan got the better of me, it was my weak moment. But before you can say Jack Robinson, they are again involved in a similar thing with other women, or sometimes even with the same women. So they will have days when they are being good and on track, and unfortunately, days when they are being influenced and encouraged by bad friends to turn to sins as a quick fix to feel better about a breakup or even losing a job. And many a times, these are men, and we spoke about this last week, are men who perhaps were molested, abused whilst they were young, and we gave the areas where this happens in schools, in male only hostels, in nowadays, unfortunately, because of this whole environment that we are living in about this LGBTQ, that also is a result of this. And sometimes even in our institutions, our madrasas, etc. And therefore, we are discussing again, and I repeat, that as parents, we need to be very, very observant in our homes regarding any unnatural behavior that we observe and address it. It is not very easy for these children to talk about this in their homes with their parents, and parents should be establishing such an environment in the home that your children are free to address any of their fears with you. So some people will then eventually take up substance abuse also as a result of an outlay. Unfortunately, even taking to alcohol, drugs, and also, and this is where the topic of our discussion, engage in casual affairs with multiple people to distract them from the pain that they are feeling. Some people can only deal with their grief, heartbreaks, anger this way, which makes it dangerous for the emotional and psychological health of not only themselves. And I'm saying this and I'm repeating this and I'm saying this very carefully so that we are understanding what we are saying. Some people can only deal with their grief, with their heartbreaks, with their trauma, with the anger that is within themselves in this way, which makes it very dangerous for the emotional, psychological health of not only themselves, but even those who are engaging with them in the sin that they are engaging with. Women who have been made to believe that these men have good intentions towards them are later left broken-hearted when they are ghosted or discarded by them because they are no longer needed to make them feel better or wanted because these people have repented. By physically engaging in intimacy. So we spoke about just having a casual affair, having all your chats that these type of people get engaged in. But unfortunately, sometimes they even engage in physical intimacy illegitimately. So with people who aren't their husbands or wives, and you are at great risk of being used by people. So, my beloved brothers and sisters, understand what we are saying here, that these narcissistic or not necessarily narcissists, but some who display some of these narcissistic traits will have these hookups with you, they will have these casual affairs with you, they will have these chats with you, etc. But it may even lead, and Allah forbid, to actual physically engaging in intimacy with people. And there are examples of this even in our own Muslim community, unfortunately, more often than what we actually think. And they will have these affairs with those who are not your husband, they are not their wives. And in this case, you are at great risk of being used by people. And you are used by people for what? To get over someone else, to feel better about themselves, and even to cheat on a spouse, and sometimes to boost their own ego, sometimes to fulfill a mission or a challenge. And they will corrupt you, unfortunately, and get you to sin with them, distract them from thinking about a difficult situation, entertain them and get you hooked on them just for fun, and to allowing others to bring their sins and their toxic energy into your body and into your private space disrupts, if not destroys, your own spiritual state. It distresses your soul. It violates Allah's rights, and it weakens your connection with Allah Ta'ala. And most importantly, it destroys your own home, which was supposed to be the castle where you find tranquility, peace, and security. Allowing others to bring their sins, allowing others to bring their toxic energy into your body, into your private space, into your home, disrupts, it even destroys, I'm repeating this, it even destroys your spiritual state with Allah Ta'ala. And it will cause your own nafs and your own soul to be distressed. It violates the rights of Allah Ta'ala. It weakens your connection with Allah Ta'ala. And unfortunately, most people don't truly know the intentions behind people wanting to be intimate with them until the deed is done, unfortunately. And the victims are left discarded. The victims are then left depleted of self-confidence, self-worth, and self-love. And this used to be something we would not really hear in our own Muslim communities in the past. But recently, more and more Muslims are behaving in the same way with vulnerable Muslims who are roped into sinning with them. Anna, you want to say anything? Any comments? Or can I continue?
Jamal, we have one comment that has come in. Wow, what you're saying is true. And when we speak to our husband about the character, about this ugly trait, they will say that Marana doesn't know what he's talking about. He must stick to the masjid. That's the reality of the conversation. How do we rectify our stance and response? And we can't even make it to the counselor for help as they don't want to.
Yeah. So, firstly, I don't think there's a need for us to comment on the Maulana that must stay into the masjid, because I think Islam is a way of life. And this concept that Islam is only in the masjid is the concept that many narcissists will use to their benefit.
Mm.
If they don't want to go with you to the counselor or whoever they want to, you on your own, I think you should go and address these issues with you, because if there is a problem, it is better not to remain in such a relationship.
Mm.
I know it seems harsh, it sounds harsh, but I said it previously that the objective of nikah that Allah Ta'ala makes mention in the Quran Kareem is tranquility, sakina, peace, comfort. And if that is not found, then the objective of nikah is not available in your home. And the best way of achieving that objective is love and mawadda, rahma, mercy. And if that mercy and love is not bringing the peace and security in your home, then what benefit is there to even remain in such a relationship? However, this toxic behavior is common, very common among narcissists who use marriage and dating apps and involves them pretending to be really interested in someone. They express a desire to have a relationship with them, using them for their own validation, for their own acceptance, for their own casual affairs, and unfortunately, as I said, eventually to even physical intimacy. And then you will find them totally disappearing, ruining many lives in the process, ruining many homes in the process. Many children become traumatized, many homes become broken because of these narcissistic traits that are in some people, and they use their approach towards certain relationships in a way. So this happens, unfortunately, among many men and women as well, who have been discarded, who sometimes thereafter being ghosted, ignored, blocked by people who weren't impressed by them, which unfortunately has crippled the way they see and value themselves. And being blocked or discarded can also be very traumatic for people, because we as humans have the ability to become very emotionally attached to a stranger after being physically intimate with them. I'm going to be talking about something, Marana, and I want us to understand what I'm saying. So sometimes when you are being ghosted and you have these casual affairs, and then eventually you find that you are being blocked, and therefore we say that don't even go close to zina. There's so much of wisdom in this ayah. So being blocked or being discarded, I see someone is saying here that a lot of people are also extremely dysregulated from the Islamic values in order to show up conducive to that identity. Absolutely. Jazakallah for that, sister. So being blocked and discarded can also be very traumatic for people, because as humans, we have the ability to become very emotionally attached to a stranger after being physically intimate with them. And this is due to hormones that Allah Ta'ala has created in our bodies. Oxytocin, that's released in large quantities during lovemaking, and also during breastfeeding a child and at childbirth. It is referred to as a love hormone in today's language. It strengthens our bond with the other person. This is experienced by women in particular as they are more emotional in nature. They have the ability to bond with others on a deeper level than men. And Allah Ta'ala has saved. And this is the beauty of Islam. And therefore, we are talking about this in this open way so that we understand that we should not fall into these traps. And Allah Ta'ala has saved the intimate and physical relationship for a husband and a wife only. Because marriage is meant to be a stable and a secure union that is not easily abandoned. It is also why many people who had an arranged marriage believe that love can come after marriage, as they experienced falling in love with their spouse when they engaged in physical intimacy and felt that emotional and physical bond. This is something that Allah Ta'ala has placed in us. In the Quran, Allah Ta'ala promised to put mawaddah, a special kind of affectionate love between husband and wife that can only be experienced by lawful physical intimacy. This type of love is filled with blessings, whereas intimacy outside the marriage is unfortunately void of this mawadda that Allah Ta'ala places. And Allah Ta'ala says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. It is the sign of Allah Ta'ala that He has created for you from yourselves mates that you may find tranquility in them. And we spoke about that. And He, Allah Ta'ala, is the one that's placed between you love and mercy. Indeed, in that are signs. In it, there is a sign for people who just give some thought. So when people engage in these relationships before marriage, they set themselves up for a very painful heartbreak when they are abandoned or when they are used or when they are played with. The Islamic ruling on physical intimacy, outside marriage has been put in place by Allah Ta'ala for the protection of women's rights. For the protection of women's rights, hearts, for the protection of both your physical and spiritual emotions, for the protection of your health. And therefore, understand that don't just get used by people who have or who display some of these narcissistic traits to fulfill their own ego, their own validation, that they're using you. It has also been put in place. The Islamic laws have been put in place to prevent all the terrible consequences that comes as a result of zina, that includes the spreading of diseases, that includes the spreading of the destruction of families and societies. Allah Ta'ala wants men to honor women. Allah Ta'ala wants men to respect women. His creation, women are the creation of Allah Ta'ala. By following the correct marriage procedures to enjoy an intimate relationship with them in a healthy way. However, when women allow men to treat them carelessly, they will surely develop a variety of soul damaging mental health issues over time, as they haven't honored themselves and the protective laws that Allah Ta'ala gave them to live a dignified life. So when women allow men to treat them carelessly, these women will surely develop soul damaging mental health issues over time, as they haven't honored themselves and the protective laws of Allah Ta'ala that Allah Ta'ala has given them to live a dignified life. And you will observe that, and sometimes in the process of our discussions now, since we've commenced with this, Marana, there's been many that have called, and they actually confess that how broken they become when such men, or on the other way, sometimes some women that take advantage of men, but how many a women become broken physically, emotionally, spiritually, when they have been used by some of these narcissistic men, or men who display these traits in order to for their own self-validation. And the result is their home becomes a qiyamah, their homes are broken, children become traumatized, and therefore we find that this is the reasons why Allah Ta'ala has given the rulings that He has given. And the more women are used by men for their pleasure, the less we will see them do what's right and make the required efforts to get married. The more women are used by men for their own pleasure, the less we will see women do what's right, and the less we will see men do what is right and make the required efforts to get married. When a man gets access to just casual intimacy, even physical intimacy, it does not motivate him to do right by himself and others. And this is something even women in non-Muslim communities are realizing today. It is often seen by them complaining. We find nowadays in the world that we are living in, the social media, Facebook, Instagram, videos and forums about how difficult it is becoming for them to find good, respectable, honorable men or honorable partners who wants to be committed to them in their relationship, who wants to settle down and have a family. The reality is the majority of these type of men, remember, keep in mind, we are not talking of the majority of people. We're not talking of the majority of the ummah. We're not talking about the majority of our Muslim men and women. Alhamdulillah, thumma alhamdulillah, the fear of Allah is there. And we're not passing judgment on the majority and generalizing the situation. But the very few, and one is too many, to destroy a home and destroy someone's emotional well-being. But the reality is, the majority of those who become people who display this ill and this disorder won't want to get married and settle down, because the dating apps, the Snapchats, and now TikTok and Instagram have given men far too many options of beautiful women they can have and who are offering them physical intimacy to even think about committing to someone whilst they are still young. Unfortunately, many of the same women who complain have themselves engaged in sexual relationships with men and have thus contributed to the problem. And therefore, we spoke about this in our last discussion, that there are many of our women among, or rather, again, I must not say many, there are among us women who dress in the abaya, who want to dress modestly, yet you will find that their perfume is extremely strong. They will still wear the abaya with their high heels. They will still wear the abayas with some design on those areas that draws the attraction of men. And these are things that we need to be extremely cautious about. Those who haven't engaged in these type of things, unfortunately, many or some women who complain have themselves engaged in these casual affairs with men and have thus contributed to the problems. And those who haven't engaged in them strongly feel that sexually active women who provide men with easy access have ruined their chances of finding decent men also. So the society that we are living in is becoming a very perverted society. Before they know, these promiscuous men and women are in their 40s, are in their 50s, and are drained emotionally, they are drained sexually, or no longer have the will or desire to be in a relationship, especially if they've been through a string of bad, terrible experiences with someone of the opposite sex. People in the minority group of this age categorically will have the desire. Again, people in the minority group, among these that we are talking of, will have the desire to start a family, to commit to someone, but even then, some won't risk marrying someone they are unable to sleep with first, unfortunately, unless they've learned from their experiences that it won't make much of a difference to them. Marana, I think I spoke a lot. Unless if you want to add some, it would be good if you add some instead of just me speaking one way about these things.
We have one message that has come in. Assalamu alaikum. I speak through personal experience. I have married into a family where my father-in-law continuously cheated on my mother-in-law in the past. He claims to have stopped but displays unusual and suspicious behavior. His grown-up kids have confronted him, but he denies it. My mother-in-law stayed with him because of her kids and also gave him many chances. Unfortunately, the trust was broken and can never be fully regained. She says this herself. I sometimes dread going out with my kids because I'm afraid my children who are now teenagers may see him. We have had many encounters in the past, but my husband and I distracted them and they didn't see him. I'm tired of being burdened with someone else's poor choices and bad behavior. I respect him because he's my husband's father and my kid's grandfather, but it's so difficult sometimes.
So as we have said, Jazakallah for that comment, we said that firstly, we're not generalizing. It's not that common, but it's becoming more common in our community now. And that is the reason why there is a need to address this. So whilst we are talking of men taking advantage of women, men are also victims of women who deceive and use them for lovemaking, for illicit relationship. However, it's rare that men will suffer from this if they aren't emotionally attached to these women. However, if the men are somewhat religious, the sin itself will affect their level of faith and the feeling of guilt can become overwhelming. Gee, Marana, you want to conclude today on this, Marana? I think you wanted to go and visit the markets also, I think.
I think we've covered quite a bit of the codependence remaining with narcissist men, and we've gave quite a few reasons of why this is happening also in society today. And you did mention one very important thing is that emotional feeling, the emotional attraction that comes about with lovemaking, and that puts a barrier when people want to move on later in life. For example, they're doing this, they engage themselves in these casual affairs, and later in life when they want to move on, it becomes quite difficult for them to move on.
Gee, absolutely, Mama.
Well, Jazakallah for your time, much appreciated. Inshallah, we'll speak to one again next week, Wednesday.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wrap it, pack it, fill it, close it.